to Mid-State Money Talk. My name is Cynthia DeFazio, joined today by Kevin Dietrich and Joe Dietrich, partners of First Choice Financial Services Incorporated. To our viewers at home, we have a very special episode for you today. If you're in the viewing audience and you're asking yourself, have I made some of these mistakes about retirement planning? Well, we're going to go through the top 15 most common mistakes that people make regarding retirement planning. You're not going to want to miss today's show because, again, if you've made a mistake, you can always correct it. So stay with us today. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
It's so good to see you, too.
Yeah.
And Kevin, how are you?
I'm great. Good to see you.
Good. Good to see you both. And, of course, we have to say hello to Alvin, who's not with us today. He's back home manning the ship, if you will.
He sure is. Yep.
So it's very interesting to me when you think about some of the top 15 mistakes that are common that are people making when it comes to retirement planning. The first one, right off the bat, not saving early enough.
That's right.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why does that sometimes happen?
Absolutely. Well, life can get busy and feel a little, thinned out at sometimes. And so we, we'll just put that off. I'll take care of that later. But the earlier we start saving, the better.
It's true.
Even if it's just on a small amount, and then increase it over time. This is a good strategy, but it is a huge mistake to try to wait until you're, preparing for retirement to start your savings. We want to start as early as possible. And like I said, even if that's a small amount, one of the things we often tell people, if you've got an employer-sponsored plan, they're making matches to that. You certainly want to take advantage of that. But even if you start with a certain percentage that you can do right now, each year maybe you get a raise or bump up. We want to increase that along with that. So it doesn't necessarily feel like that really hard hit when you're coming from saving 3% to 10%.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That makes sense.
What's really neat is that a lot of employer-sponsored plans, 401ks, a lot of folks know them as, will have an automatic increase you can click on. And so let's say you start, even if you're young, newly married, and having kids, and you got into a 401k, you start at 1 or 2%. Just start with something.
Start with something.
And then have an automatic increase each year. Because typically people get a 3% cost of living adjustment, typically. And so if you can just increase that 1% each year, you're going to keep up with that cost of living adjustment as well. And next thing you know, you're up around 10%, and it doesn't feel like a whole lot of a burden. So it's just strategically doing that.
Yep.
Makes sense.
During your working years, if you get a raise or you change jobs, these are good times to reevaluate the budget, because we want to get up into that 10, 12, 15% to really be on track of what your retirement goals are. And really that's a good segue, is because we want to know what those retirement goals are so we can kind of work back to what that savings rate should be.
Absolutely.
Recent studies have shown that people that are working with an advisor, especially early on in life, are almost twice as likely to be on track for those retirement savings.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you for pointing that out. Kevin, what about this next one? Underestimating retirement expenses. I can think that would be a doozy.
It can be a doozy because we often tell the folks at our workshop is that you've never been retired before. This is uncharted territory. You remember when you got married, you start having kids, and you have these expectations, right, of what marriage is going to be like, and then it's nothing like that a lot of times. But and then you start having kids, and you think, I know what this is going to be like, and it's not like that. And so these are uncharted territories. These are spots in our life that we don't know what to do, even some of the questions to ask, right? And so, there's expenses in retirement that people don't think about. Long-term care, the healthcare, rising costs of healthcare, inflation. People don't even think about inflation.
Yeah.
But it's that silent, increasing of goods and services, the cost of goods and services throughout the years. So creating a detailed budget is so important.
Absolutely it is.
And updating that budget on a regular basis. You'd be surprised how many folks that are coming into our office that are in their 60s making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that don't have a budget.
Wow.
We ask them, what's your expenses like? Let me see here. And we have to start listing as they're naming off what their expenses are. Then we have some other folks that say, here you go, here's my Excel spreadsheet of my budget.
Wow.
And so there's definitely a difference of what they have, what their assets look like, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the expenses are definitely overlooked. Everybody thinks, well, if I can just save X amount of dollars, I'm going to be okay. Well, really the most important number you have is what is your monthly expenses going to be. That's what you're planning around. What is your needs? What is your lifestyle goals? What are those special things that you are going to be planning for retirement? That is what we're working around, not just some arbitrary number, I need 1 million, 2 million, 4 million, whatever it might be to retire. That might be true if you've already done the math and worked backwards to find out what is going to be right for you in your retirement lifestyle.
A lot of times folks struggle, even young. I did when I was a young man married, that I just need to make more money. Well, sometimes you just need to cut expenses.
True.
If you cut expenses, you just got a pay increase.
That's true.
And it's the same thing when you're retired. And so you have to understand what those expenses are like, and sometimes you have to cut those expenses. Maybe you don't go on 6 vacation, maybe you go on 4, those types of things.
Right, right. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, I want to guide this next one to you, Joe, really quickly. Failing to diversify investments and not maximizing employer retirement plans.
Yes. Failing
to diversify. Why is that a mistake?
Absolutely. So this really comes from, we kind of put a set it and forget it mindset, right? And we talked about early on, we're starting to add a little bit here, save and save. You need to be revisiting that on occasion. Is your investment mix right for you at the age you are and the age that you want to retire? What are your goals and objectives going to be? So that is super, super important, particularly as we get into that red zone years with the 5 or so years or so before we retire and the 5 or so years after we retire, maybe even a little bit wider than that. We want to start being very strategic in how much risk we're taking on, because a big market downturn, people maybe be able to kind of relate to that right about now, could really impact you. And that sequence of returns can start to snowball and really hurt you later on. So, making sure that you're revisiting your asset allocations and your asset locations is important.
Absolutely.
And obviously the low-hanging fruit is the 401k match or the 403b match. If your employer is going to be matching some contribution to you, that's essentially free money. You need to be taking advantage of that. If they're matching up to 6% and you're only putting in 3 or 4%, there's a good bit of money there that you could be adding to your retirement investment accounts at no additional cost.
Yeah, you're leaving money on the table at that point.
Absolutely, you would be.
Yep.
Well, Kevin, what about this next one? Not having an emergency fund. How is that a mistake?
Well, that's a huge mistake. It goes back to the expenses, mistake that we talked about in number 2 there, is that you should at least have 6 to 12 months of expenses set aside as an emergency fund.
Okay.
And I know as you're young and you're married, having kids, that's hard.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you're living paycheck to paycheck a lot of times. But
Many people
that goes
are.
back to question number 2, mistake number 2. Make sure that we're detailing our budget, and sometimes we have to cut back of those expenses. Sometimes you can't put in 6% into a 401k, you can put in 4%. But at least do something.
Right.
So all of these really play a factor on top of one another. Yeah. But having an emergency fund, a nest egg, if you will, is so important.
Yes.
Even if it's just like, if you're putting, it's the same type of thought process as going into the 401k. Putting $10 into a savings account every pay is something that you're putting aside.
Absolutely.
So start with something.
We're creatures of habit. We're emotional creatures. So structuring your environment to set you up for success.
Yes.
So if you've got an account that you can automatically deposit some of your paycheck into, is going to allow that to grow, and you're going to start forgetting about it until all of a sudden one day you're going hey, we're almost there, And whether that's 3 to 6 months early on to try to get you over the hump if you lose your job or you had an emergency, but as we get closer to retirement, we prefer that 6 to 12 month of expenses amount, because we're going to have large healthcare costs perhaps in the future. You might have a dependent that all of a sudden needs a little bit of help, that sort of thing. You never know what pops up.
That is true. That is true.
This advice is coming from experience. I mean, these are things that we do. I have 2 savings accounts that my direct deposit check goes into, a portion of it.
Yep.
I forget that they're there. A lot of times I look and there's a couple $1,000 in there.
Perfect.
And so these things can happen, and we wouldn't ask you to do these things if we're not willing to do them ourselves.
I love that, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Time for our very first commercial break. To our viewers at home, we're talking about some common mistakes that people make when it comes to their retirement planning. You don't want to make one of these mistakes, and we have the opportunity for you to have your own customized retirement plan crafted for your needs, your wants, and your goals today, completely complimentary. All you have to do is call in 888-959-2743. That's 888-959-2743. What exactly are you calling in for? The Complementary Retirement Plan. This is going to be designed once again around your goals and your dreams. This is just for you. And again, there's no obligation. If you're rushing out the door and you don't have a pen handy, we've made it even simpler. Just grab your smartphone, click on the QR code at the bottom corner of your screen. That'll take you right to the landing page of First Choice Financial Services, and you can claim your spot accordingly. You deserve it. You only retire once. We're going to take a very short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. We have some more of the top 15 mistakes that people are making when we return.
When we tell someone something, they'll say, we can take that to the bank. If we can't do something, we'll tell them that. We're straight up with our clients. It all comes down to using the products for the people's needs, not selling product.
Being independent means that we have freedom to do what's best for our clients. We're not beholden to any other party to make sure that we're meeting a quota or restricted on what it is that we can do or provide. We're free to go out into the market and find what's best for them and what's going to meet their needs.
The world's our oyster, as far as what resources we have for our clients, and that's beneficial for our clients more than anything.
Don't be afraid to go ask for help. Find somebody you can trust and start the process. Obviously, the financial part is very important. Having a plan in place that's going to provide you with sustainable income, that's resilient to the changes of life and of the market, that's really important.
Money doesn't care who it serves. And one of the things that we like to do in our company is we like to be able to help people determine where their money is going to be and who it's going to serve generation after generation.
Welcome back to Midstate Money Talk. My name is Cynthia DeFazio, joined today by Kevin Dietrich and Joe Dietrich, partners of First Choice Financial Services Incorporated. Our show today is talking about the top 15 most common mistakes that people make when it comes to planning for their retirement. We're going to jump back in with number 5. This next one, this is very interesting, Joe. This is over-reliance on Social Security. Why is that a mistake?
That's right. That's right. We want to look at what assumptions we are making moving into retirement, and relying on Social Security is one of them. Obviously, that's going to be a cornerstone of our income, but it's only going to be a part. That could be 30, 40% of your income, maybe a little bit more, but that's only going to be a part. We need to start planning ahead now to find out where else is our income sources going to be, tax implications, all of that kind of stuff. But relying solely on Social Security could be a big mistake.
Okay.
Yep.
Kevin, this next one, ignoring health care and long-term care costs. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That goes back to underestimating expenses in retirement, mistake number 2, because we don't think about healthcare costs. We don't think about long-term care. We are young, we're vibrant, and we're going to live forever.
It's true.
All the men are anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, our health insurance comes out in payroll deductions. We don't, we kind of set it and forget it. We're so familiar with it, we kind of forget that it's going to change. And we've talked about Medicare quite extensively in our last episode, actually. So, but assuming that that's not going to be a major expense is a major mistake.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely.
And when people think about long-term care is when their parents are in long-term care. So a lot of folks one of the questions is, do you have concern about long-term care? Or nursing homes say, no, not really. Or some other person might say, well, absolutely, my mom is in a nursing home, and it just hit me in the face that this is a real thing, and this could happen, and it could eat away of my assets and my resources. Yeah. They could take away your home, and so these are a real mistake that people are overlooking.
Yes.
To not be concerned about that and not to plan for that.
Yes.
We could plan for that without buying long-term care insurance. There's lots of ways to make sure that we're having some coverage for long-term care in our retirement. So just pick up the phone, call us, and we'll talk you through that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Joe, this next one, not factoring in inflation.
Yes.
Wow. Talk about that a little bit. That's a mistake.
It's actually kind of surprising that it's on the list, because inflation has been a hot topic over recent years, and it should be. Between 2020 and 2025 now, there have been items that have gone up 20, 30% due to inflation. Now we're kind of getting that back under control, and the inflation rates may still be what people think is kind of normal. But inflation rate, we just think of inflation rate as different than the impact of inflation over time, because like you said, we might be spending 25% more on eggs or groceries or gas. And that's because that inflation rate is added each year over and over again. Over a 21 year retirement, you're probably going to be spending twice of what you spend now on your expenses. You need to be planning for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kevin, this next one, tapping retirement savings too early. A lot of people have been doing that to pay off debt. So talk a little bit about that.
Oh, yes, we definitely get questions of that all the time. Should I, go into my 401k and pull out money to pay off my mortgage, my mortgage, or should I pay off my car or whatever? Or, but there's penalties and there's fees that are associated. If you're under 59 and a half and you're trying to access any type of qualified accounts, which is your IRA or 401k, 403b, employer-sponsored plans, there's a penalty of 10% currently. That's the penalty amount, and of course there's taxes involved in that as well, because those are deferred accounts. So those are just things that people need to be aware of, and sit down with someone that understands these things and say, is this the best situation? Is this the best option for me at this particular moment, or can we try to incorporate some other funds, some from somewhere else, to help pay down some debt or take care of emergency?
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Joe, this next one, failing to plan for taxes in retirement. Wow, we can talk about that for a while, because you actually have the taxfirst.net website set up. So talk about that, failing to plan for taxes in retirement.
Yeah, taxes are going to be one of your major expenses in retirement. Surprise, surprise. Now, just because we stopped working doesn't mean taxes go away. We still need to be able to supplement our Social Security income. We talked about that. That could have some tax implications, most likely will. A lot of people assume that our taxes are going to go down in retirement, but we're finding that more and more people actually are keeping the same tax rates, or maybe even going up, particularly when they hit 73 or 75, and we're now into RMD territory. So that it can be a dangerous assumption. So taxes need to be planned for. One of the things that we like to talk about a lot is preparing for those RMDs and those withdrawal strategies. The RMD, the tax calculator is on our website, so that's a really good tool to start with. Kind of look at what maybe Roth conversions can do for you as you start preparing for retirement and that kind of gap between your RMD age. So if you go to our website or you go to taxfirst.net, you can start your journey there. You get a report, personalized report, and you may want somebody to walk you through that report, and you might want to give us a call to talk about that.
I love that. So taxfirst.net, and people put in a little bit of information, and they can see what the benefit would be with perhaps doing Roth conversions and things like that to relieve their tax burden.
Correct.
Fantastic. Kevin, this next one, not having a withdrawal strategy. That's a big one too. People are making that mistake all the time.
This goes back to withdrawing retirement savings too early. That's a typical mistake we see a lot, is not having a plan. If in case you've missed it, we do a lot of planning. And so that's our priority, and that's what differentiates us from others, is that we do the planning on all these aspects. And having a withdrawal strategy, when do I start taking some money out of my 401ks, IRAs, or Roths, or not qualified accounts, or brokerage accounts, or from the bank, from a CD, whatever, all those assets, where do I withdraw the money from, and what timing? It's really important to have that strategy in place.
Okay.
Yeah. We talk again about what are assumptions that you're making. A lot of people come in and go, well, I make X amount of dollars a month. I've got $7,000 a month coming in. I'm going to replace that. And we need to think about our income a little bit differently in retirement. We encourage them to do that. Part of that is to set aside a withdrawal strategy so that we can be tax efficient.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Kevin, you and Joe have a very special message and offer to the viewers at home. Talk about what that is.
Yeah, we want to offer you to come in and sit down with us one-on-one and get your questions answered, get a plan started for you, and a plan in place to take care of all of these questions, concerns you may have. We do workshops on a monthly basis. We talk about Social Security, we talk about Medicare, we talk about taxes, and that's all planning. We offer our viewers at home a free consultation, a complimentary, customized plan just for you, for your individual situation, and it's free to you. Take advantage of that.
Kevin, thank you. Joe, thank you. To the viewers at home, the number to call is 888-959-2743, 888-959-2743. Again, this report is completely complimentary. It's your retirement plan. I know you want to pick up the phone and call in today, 888-959-2743, or click the QR code at the bottom corner of your screen. We're going to take a very short commercial break. We're going to get through the final list of the top 15 mistakes that people make with retirement planning when we return.
The work never seems to end until the day it finally does. After nearly a lifetime on the job, you should be rewarded for all the time you spent working. Whether that's crossing off items on your bucket list, learning a new passion, or rekindling the love of an old one. After all, life isn't over when you stop working. It's the start of an all-new chapter. The one where you're the writer and you get to choose how your story will go. A way to achieve that is by having a clear financial plan to sustain your golden years. The biggest fear most retirees have is if they'll have enough money to maintain the lifestyle they've always enjoyed. Having a plan to help protect you against the curveballs life often throws will help to maintain your lifestyle. Call today to get your free written financial plan so you may live every day to the fullest and enjoy the retirement of your dreams.
Welcome back to Midstate Money Talk. My name is Cynthia DeFazio, joined today by Kevin Dietrich and Joe Dietrich, partners of First Choice Financial Services Incorporated. In today's show, we're talking about the top 15 common mistakes that people make when it comes to retirement planning. This next one, I think this is very interesting because we talk about this quite often. But Joe, neglecting estate planning.
Yes.
Wow, big mistake that people make.
Sometimes an elephant in the room, the estate planning. And
true.
Kevin mentioned this about long-term care. Sometimes it's just a matter of, unless this has hit you personally, it may be something you're overlooking, and that would be a mistake. It doesn't have to be complicated. Some very strategic questions to kind of walk through and find out what's the appropriate level of planning, some real practical steps for you that can be taken. It doesn't have to be scary, but it is a mistake to be ignoring it.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah.
Kevin, this next one, ignoring required minimum distributions, just forgetting about them, ignoring them.
Or not realizing you have to take it out. I mean, that's when you are putting money into your 401k, 403bs, your employer-sponsored plans, even to an IRA, at age 73 or above, depending on the year you're born, you have to start taking a percentage of that out. And there's a penalty if you do not. And so you should get documentation from each of those company that you have the money invested in,
Okay.
which tells you how much you got to take out and when by. So ignoring that can cost you a penalty.
Okay.
Up to 25%, I believe it is.
And even though
This year.
the company should be sending them paperwork, should be sending you paperwork, it's still ultimately your responsibility to make those
Correct.
those computations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stay
Exactly.
informed. Talk with someone that understands this. We have in our system, in our office, a process that will, be proactive in, hey, RMD time coming. Here's the amount you got to take out. So we actually call our clients and sit down and talk about that face to face.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, this next one, Joe, let me just guide this. Taking on too much debt before retirement.
Yes,
That can be something
absolutely.
that people find themselves doing.
Yeah, we often have people coming in with different types of lifestyles, different types of life changes later in life. They maybe gotten remarried, or just at this point we want to buy that next big house, our forever home, that sort of thing. We really want to be cautious as we make those decisions and look what's that impact going to be like approaching and through retirement, because additional debt, credit card debt, high mortgage payments, personal loans, these kind of things, they put us in a situation now we have some competing priorities here. We're trying to create income and be tax efficient, but we've got these debt load that some money has to go there each month. This makes it a little bit more difficult as we start planning, and the dollar can only be spent once, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
I
That
believe.
is true.
Yeah.
I have a quick story to
Yeah.
this. I think we have some time. We had a couple come in. I had a couple come in that was newly married within a year or so, and he owned his home. They were living there, and she wanted to buy a new home. He didn't really want to. He asked for our advice. We told him not to because of the planning we did, and they went out and bought a home anyway. A couple months later, they're getting a divorce. And so I met with him and her, and they both agreed that they should never bought that home.
Oh.
And so now they have a mortgage, and they're both closer to retirement age. And so having someone in your corner that can give you that advice is important.
Yes.
But listening to that advice is so much more important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Kevin, what about not adjusting investment strategy over time? That's a mistake that people are making.
Well, sure. As you approach retirement age, approach a red zone, your risk tolerance probably was going to come down.
Okay.
And so typically when you're younger and you're putting money into the market and you're a little more aggressive, so we having to adjust that over time is very, very important. So having a financial advisor that can help you with that, a retirement advisor can help you with that is so important. And listening to that person and taking their advice is so important as well. So when you get into those red zones, you're not too aggressive. And when the market does what it's doing right now, you're not sweating bullets.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, again, what assumptions are we making, right?
Yes.
Well, I've been in this fund for the last 30 years. It's done well for me. Well, that's because you've had 30 years to allow it to go up and go down and continue to grow.
Yep.
We're getting closer to retirement. We don't necessarily have that time until we may have to start drawing on that account. And now the rules are different.
That's true.
Yeah.
Very, very good
Longevity
point.
is a huge factor.
Yep.
And that's our number 15, actually,
Really?
not
Yeah.
accounting for longevity. That's our final one today.
Yeah, so longevity, it plays a huge factor. When are you going to live till?
Yeah.
None of us know. Only the man above knows that. So
That's true.
we need to be careful that we're making the right choices and not going into debt too late. Making sure that you have the right withdrawal strategies out there in place. So much falls on that.
Yep. And as we're planning, we're making assumptions of a bunch of different things: expenses, income, longevity. How we're going to want to assume, maybe plan a little bit longer than we might even think. It's a whole lot better to plan longer and not run out of money than plan shorter and be in trouble.
Absolutely.
This
Makes
sort of
perfect
wraps up
sense.
the entire show, because the first mistake was that you're not putting more money. You're not putting money into the
Not saving enough, not starting
and
yet
because
early
our
enough.
retirement is longer now.
Yeah.
I mean, typically you're working 30 to 40 years. You might be retired 30 to 40 years, depending on when you retire.
Right.
So that's a huge deal.
It really is.
Sure is.
And-
It truly is.
We've got a new tool to be used
Oh, yeah.
by our people that are watching today. If you go to firstchoicequiz.com, you'll be able to do a retirement readiness quiz. So this is another really great first step to look at what assumptions are you making, what mistakes you might be making, and you can get your personalized report from that quiz and find out, are you ready? And if you feel you're ready, great. If you don't feel you're ready, then you definitely should be calling us. Pick up the phone, call the number on the screen, use the QR code, go right to that quiz and find out where you are.
Absolutely.
To the viewers at home, thank you for spending time with us today. Be safe, be happy, and be blessed.